And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporates and Investment Banking, turning intent into execution. That's how ABSA are invested in Africa's energy future. Good evening. Welcome to the program. 8 minutes after 6. I'm Stephen Grootes. One of those strange public holidays where the reason for the holiday was yesterday, was Women's Day yesterday. We get the public holiday today. That means it feels like a public holiday. It feels like Women's Day, but Women's Day was actually yesterday, which is not at all as confusing as how it's going to feel tomorrow when it's going to feel like Monday, but is actually Tuesday. With me? Well, I'm glad you are, because I have no idea where you are. I've been talking over the last couple of months, my team and I, we have this quite anguished conversation at times about how do you get more women guests on The Money Show. And part of this, a big part of this actually, is because the show reflects the business community. I mean, we can't really get away from that. And in particular, when we look at results interviews and we speak to people on the JSE and we speak to, the CEOs of those companies, by and large, they tend to be male. And we don't have control over that. We want to do the interviews with the companies, and so on we go. And I think that's the right decision. I must say, I was astonished, actually surprised to hear that more companies on the JSE have female chairs than have female CEOs. I was really staggered by that. How did that happen? I thought that was very interesting. I don't know if there's something about shared responsibility and making decisions. I don't know. And people are a little bit more worried about, giving all of the power of a CEO, day-to-day stuff to a woman. I don't know if it's that. I mean, maybe that's overthinking it a little bit. I do wonder, and maybe you have some thoughts, and I'd really be keen to hear them, please, on 072-702-1702. Could it be just the general nature of society? Perhaps childcare, which I know is a big, big issue when you look at these things. And so women get to a particular level and are held back at some point in their career. And that means it's much harder to become a CEO, maybe. I know some people might say, well, actually, men are happy to have women in senior positions, but not the sort of day-to-day running of the company. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know if you've got a thought. I wonder if it's maybe the structure of our society in other ways that's probably affecting this. I think that's most likely, the thing. So I find it very curious that we have more female chairs than we have female CEOs. I found that, I was a little surprised by that, because also people who run boards, people who are on boards tend to have a lot of business experience. So a lot of them would have been CEOs at one time or another. The classic way to get onto a board is to have been CEO of the same company, and gone through the process and then finished your time and then had a break and then all of those sorts of things. So I think that that's really the issue, So I would be very interested to see your view on that and to just find out a little bit more as to why you think that might be happening. So I think that could be quite interesting. We'll talk about that after 6:30. Katlego Mothudi is the managing director at the Board of Healthcare Funders, and he's really calling for big changes to the system of prescribed minimum benefits. These are the things that you have to have, that you have to be paid out for if you're on medical aid. So that I find very interesting. And we'll talk about that with him in just a moment. Stavros Nicolaou is the chair of the Pharmaceuticals Made in South Africa. I mean, I know Stavros Nicolaou wears many hats in that industry. But, many of the drugs that you take are actually regulated. He's worried about, on that side, you've got the regulation, so they can't charge more for certain drugs. On the other side, you've also got the fact that fuel prices, oil prices are up, and that's having quite a big impact on them. And so they're getting squeezed in a vice, and I can understand the complexity of that. So we'll talk to Stavros Nicolaou about that in about 10 minutes' time. Then the issue of female CEOs. Kwanele Ngogela is the head of social impact at Just Share. Kwanele has been looking at that issue. And Haley Parry's a money coach and facilitator of One Life Insurance Truth About Money, about how many more women today do feel more empowered, more confident about their finances. And this is where the pay gap becomes a big issue, doesn't it? Because, the more you earn, the more independent you feel, the more secure you feel. And we know there's still a big pay gap in our society between men and women. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I think that's going to be interesting. And then insurance and how important it is, and insurance fraud, the impact that has on you, because you end up having to pay higher premiums. We'll talk about that from 7:30 this evening. I was really interested to hear from someone who's been doing some research on this, about the fact that 70% of people who live in former homeland areas, and I've yet to come across a better description, I wish there was one, but former homeland areas, if you offered them tenure on the land they're living on, so this is your land, you can give it to your children, would say no. I was staggered by that. As someone who's, lived in a suburb his whole life, I kind of feel, I want to own my own home. So I was really surprised by that. And one of the explanations seems to be people are a bit scared of having to pay to the state. So they don't want to have to pay rates to the state and be part of a council. And I can understand that. If you, or maybe your family, you grew up in or you live in or your family lives in a sort of former homeland area, you would know more about this than I do. I'd be very interested, please, on 072 702 1702. And of course, you can call us as well on 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567. It's 14 minutes now after 6 o'clock.
The Money Show.
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DSTV channel 856.
Well, an impassioned plea over the weekend from the Managing Director at the Board of Healthcare Funders, Dr. Katlego Mothudi, for government to reform and crucially, I think, update the current system of prescribed minimum benefits. These are the benefits you must get from medical aid, even if you've used all your cover. The idea is to ensure that you're protected from worst-case scenarios. Well, Katlego Mothudi is on the line now. Katlego, good evening, and thanks for your time. I mean, you say the system as it is now is very outdated. The regulations are supposed to be updated every 2 years. And in fact, they were last updated 20 years ago. I was staggered to read that. What are the consequences of this?
Yeah, good evening, Stephen, and thanks for having us. It is a huge challenge. When prescribed minimum benefits were first introduced, I think just before 2000, it was as a response to, I would say, inadequate and often disrupted access that medical aid beneficiaries were subjected to. When benefits ran out, you'd essentially be either discharged or referred to a state institution. And this came as a remedy to that. And you are correct in saying that the plan was to review them every 2 years because there was recognition that disease states and pricings and their pricings are not static. As a result, we've seen quite a big jump in terms of the package that they were originally costed at. If I can maybe just give you an indication, around 2003, when schemes budgeted, 40% of that budget would be allocated to prescribed minimum benefits. At the moment, it's north of 60%. What it means practically is that at the moment, because it establishes the threshold for entry into healthcare funding, you and every beneficiary on the scheme, you would be liable to about 1,600 rand per month per beneficiary. It means that a family of three is out of pocket by 4,000 rand just at the lowest level.
Okay. Why hasn't it been updated for 20 years? Is this a function of government? Is the health department supposed to do this?
Yes, the responsibility is actually that of the Department of Health as well as the Council for Medical Schemes. Now, the last changes that were effected were in 2003, and I think for the past 8 years, there's been several committees that were put together, but they have never come out with anything. But I think, to be honest, the real reason was that there was really no agency because of the NHI being on the horizon.
So basically, I mean, it's been on the horizon for a long time, and therefore nothing has changed in this sector. And I mean, frankly, I don't know your view, but it seems to me unlikely it will be implemented in a major way in 10 years.
Yeah, it is looking unlikely. We've had people at our conference who are saying we are looking at least maybe another 10 to 15 years. So it is important that we review these PMBs. And if, even according to government's own admission that they don't want to wipe out medical aid schemes under the NHI, it would make sense for government to seek much more affordable ways to provide access even through the medical aid schemes.
Okay, so if this list was revised, and I realize it can be revised in lots of different ways, but would it be likely to make what you pay for medical aid less? Would it make medical aids cheaper?
We think so. There is a rider, of course, on that, Stephen, in that we are aware that healthcare inflation does top up on CPI. So the cost of healthcare delivery is expensive. But we think that the structuring of these PMBs, while it was relevant at the time when it was put into place, it has now propagated cost. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we've seen the regulation that introduced medical aids, prescribed minimum benefits. There was a stipulation that payment for these services should be at cost. What it meant is that as a practitioner, whenever you saw somebody and you diagnosed them with a PMB condition, you could charge anything you wanted. And that also was a challenge that befell us. We saw prescribed minimum benefits actually driving up costs, not just based on the package itself. The other issue is that it is not as comprehensive as we would like to believe. There are many conditions that should have been included but were not included. And secondly, it is not in line with where we are marching towards universal health coverage. It does not include preventative or promotive elements of healthcare because it's based on what is called diagnosis treatment pairs. So you basically either have to be admitted and then access those 270 conditions or have one of the 26 chronic conditions with very little preventative health care. So it was actually always setting itself up for an increase in high cost. Yeah.
I mean, obviously you want patients to be, sort of screened, or to screen themselves regularly. This that makes no provision for that, and that makes it much more likely that certain conditions will suddenly become, for you and for government, much more expensive.
Definitely. What it means is that if you've got about 60-70% of your budget already tied up in what is curative or hospice-centric, there's very little on the day-to-day aspect. That's why you've seen an increase in the savings component of our contributions increasing. And also, when you list conditions by name or diagnosis, you lend yourself to almost being selective to what you can pay. And we have suggested that this should rather be service-based. When you need to see a practitioner, you are able to be seen. And then the other big change that we wanted to, or we've suggested, is that we should rather also have an essential medicine list, much like what is happening in government. When you go to a clinic or a primary care center or district hospital, you will be treated according to the list of medicines that are available for any of the conditions that you might have. That would make it much easier. We've been able to track that when we look at the out-of-pocket payments, for example. People spend money on what we think are essential medicines and also diagnosis.
Isn't there a risk that healthcare at the moment is such a big political issue that this could inflame the entire issue a lot more and actually make it harder for kind of cooler heads to prevail or to meet in the middle? I mean, aren't you worried that this could sort of, go in another direction that makes it uncontrollable? And healthcare, as you know, is hugely difficult and hugely politicized.
The discussion should not. Otherwise, whoever goes against the suggestion would not be fully subscribed to the notion of universal health coverage. Remember, the prescripts are that you want to provide essential healthcare services where and when needed. And the other rider is that to the extent that we can afford them. And us revising prescribed minimum benefits this way actually subscribes to that notion. So I would actually find it difficult for anybody to go against revising PMBs to avoid broader access.
Sure. Dr. Katlego Mothudi, thank you. Managing Director at the Board of Healthcare Fund. There's so much to this. I mean, I'm sure that someone somewhere is a little cynical in some ways about, why this is happening, what's going on, why it is that government is not actually moving. I would think the health department would want to stay current. I would think. I mean, when it comes to health, as you know, things can be incredibly political around health. And so that really does make things quite difficult. And I also can't help but feel that maybe someone somewhere is just not moving with the times. And how often do we see something in government really not moving with the times in the way that it should? I find that really quite interesting. But as I say, I become so cynical in my old age that, maybe there's, there are other ways to think about it. The other thing, of course, is that if you look at what's changed in South Africa over 20 years with medical technology, I mean, what people can see now in a kind of routine screening, the screening wouldn't have existed 20 years ago. And so all of these things are not being covered in the way that they should be. And that surely, I would think, is a major, major problem. I would think that that's something that actually, really does just show you how important it is to actually make a change and to keep up to date with things. I think that would really tell us something about how important that actually is. So very interesting to sort of see how all of that plays out.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes
On 702.
702.
25 minutes now after 6, the time I should say. There's been the most astonishing story playing out with Bitcoin, and Bloomberg's been reporting on it over the last day or so. And essentially what happened was that someone was able to get into an actual Bitcoin wallet, and a series of them owned by a company called CoinKite was the name of the company. And the whole point of these things was that, as you know, I don't know that much about it, but when you have a cryptocurrency and when you have something like Bitcoin, you would be able to take the Bitcoin and store them physically in a place. So you store the code physically in a place, or you store the code in a very secure system. There are people who specialize in managing this for you. And what seems to have happened in this case is that somehow people were actually able to break the code. And there were sort of clues that you would have in case you'd forgotten. The clues were too easy, and as a result, people lost quite a lot of money. Now, all of this comes at quite a difficult time, in fact, for Bitcoin, because if you look at Bitcoin's pricing, it's been going down, and that then does, and at the same time, the kind of wave of, I suppose you'd call it crypto optimism, that came when Donald Trump won the US election and came in and it looked like he was going to make life easier for cryptocurrencies. All of that seems to have sort of washed itself away in quite a strange way. Been a bit surprised by how quickly it happens. But I couldn't help but think about so many different things that could go wrong when this happens. So if my money got wiped out in some way, and if, it disappeared from the bank, I would at least kind of know who to go and speak to and why this happened, and there'll be an investigation and government would investigate, and there'll be all sorts of things that would happen because banks have become institutionalized. If I had my money in, cash money, and I had it under my bed, well, I kind of know who knew it was under my bed, or dare I say in my sofa, or whatever it is. So I thought that was interesting. I do find the whole thing curious as to why and how an event like this can happen and how it can make, have such a big impact on people. But it also just is a reminder of how difficult an asset class, how much more development still needs to happen. Because I think what's happening is that this is something that's brand new. I know it's, almost 20 years old in some forms. But in terms of the actual idea, the mechanics of it just hasn't become simplified, agreed upon, and hasn't actually just become institutionalized. And it's the institutionalization that maybe is sort of lacking with Bitcoin. So I think that's part of the problem, is that there's still so much to do here. I do wonder as well, where do we go next? I mean, if you've looked at how crypto prices have dropped and the impact of that and what that means then for people who've been holding Bitcoin, what it means for people who've been investing in it, and what happens sort of next there, because the development of this really matters. And that, I think, is, fundamental. And I'm not convinced at this stage that people are really giving it the confidence that it should have. And I can say that because of the price of it. The gold price has been going great guns. I remember not long ago that, people were very, very keen on cryptocurrencies and thinking that actually this would be the future and gold would be replaced as the store of value. Not anymore.
Stephen Grootes
Taking your calls
on 011-883-0702.
Trudy Brookman's a consumer attorney. You know her, and she's called in about the conversation around prescribed minimum benefits. Trudy, hi, good evening. Go for it.
Hi, Stephen. I'm looking at things from a consumer perspective, and I am concerned that we have a lot of consumers in South Africa who are entitled to PMB benefits but may not be getting them because the experience is that getting your PMB condition registered with your medical scheme can be such a convoluted and unuser-friendly experience that I think many patients actually just give up. The medical aids we're finding they use jargon. They make it incredibly difficult for an ordinary South African. For myself, I've tried to do it. I'm highly educated and very assertive, and I had a hell of a time just getting my PMB conditions registered with my medical aid. So I want to encourage consumers to be very assertive with their medical aid. And to speak to a consumer lawyer, if you get stuck, you are entitled to those PMB conditions, but they make it phenomenally difficult for you to get your registration in place so that you can get the benefits.
Trudy, journalists and lawyers are usually as cynical as each other. Do you think that there's a reason why they make it so difficult?
Of course, Stephen. They're saving money if they're not registering you for the PMB condition, but they are obligated by law to cover you for those conditions and stand on your rights and ensure that you get them.
Yeah, I mean, it's so strange that it happens. Trudy Brookman, thank you, the consumer attorney, getting in touch with us about prescribed minimum benefits. Your stories, please, on this, on 072-702-1702. Really important to, get on with that. It's just gone 6:30.
Stephen Grootes
taking your calls
on 011-883-0702.
We're talking about prescribed minimum benefits earlier. Selma from Rudaport, hi. You have experience in this?
Oh, yes, plenty of. See, I suffer from brittle bone disease, so if I have a motor vehicle accident that's sufficiently severe, or if I fall from something and I break a bone, and sometimes the doctors in the hospital then say, look, to be able to see exactly what's what, you need a CT scan, or maybe even an MRI, depending on how serious it is. The last one was specifically after a motor vehicle accident where my sternum was broken right through in the middle. So what happens is then when they're supposed to now get the authorization for this, they come and said, you have a co-payment of 3,000 something. How much is the medical aid paying? Only about 1,000. Okay. Now, it tells them that MVA is an accident according to the laws. It has to be, your CT scans and anything else have to be paid for in full. So, if you don't mind, tell them if they do not do that, I will unfortunately have to phone Radio 702 on Rella Begile's show in the afternoon on Thursday and speak to Wenola, and then everybody will know that you are one of the 17 medical aids that have been fingered for refusing to pay for minimum benefits. And then within a few minutes, sort of afterwards, the lady who's supposed to sort out the authorization goes back. They say it's fine. They're sending through the authorization for the full amount.
Wow. Well, I always say don't mess with Wendy Nola. But Selma, it just shouldn't be like that. I mean, what would have happened if you hadn't said that, for example?
I would have had to pay in 3,000 rand.
Aye.
And they do that to everybody. They even try and bamboozle you by saying, it doesn't matter what the law says, we've got our own rules. And I said to them, now hang on, the law overrules your rules. So don't come and tell me bully beef. One actually also after another, I mean, I must have used this story 3 or 4 times already during the last 10 years or whatever it was. And then I say to them the same thing. The one guy actually phoned up myself and I said, I have to get this authorization and I have to pay. No, I don't have to pay that. Same thing. I'm going to complain to them. Thousands of millions of people will hear that you're such a rotten medical aid. Just hang on. I just want to speak to my supervisor 5 minutes later. The authorization for the full amount should already be in your inbox. There
Sure.
it is.
Selma, thank you. More power to you, by the way. Auntie Wendy Nola, Selma, thank you. 16 minutes now to 7.
702.
702.
Stephen is on the Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, Women's Day commemorated yesterday. Can be quite important to understand where there is change and where there isn't. And there seems to be quite a bit of change in our boardrooms, but there hasn't been a change in the position of CEO. Those positions, particularly CEO and to a large extent chair, are still dominated by men. Kwanele Ngogela is the head of social impact at Just Share. Kwanele, good evening. I must just tell you, I was telling the listener earlier that the people I produce the Money Show with, the team and I, we've often noticed it's very easy, or relatively easy, to find women to come onto the show as experts. If you're looking for an economist or someone who watches markets or whatever, you can do that. They're often female board members. But when it comes to CEO interviews, the vast majority are men. There are incredibly few women. Why do you think that is, specifically for the position of CEO?
No, thank you very much, Stephen, for having us. Always a pleasure. Evening to you and the listeners at home. Maybe we should preface the conversations by just outlining that this is our 2025 report, Stephen, which the one that we are currently talking about. So it's a 2025 report, and it was the third consecutive report in which Just Share tracked women's representation on boards and executive teams, and we are focusing on the JSE top 40 companies. So maybe you may ask why the emphasis on the top 40. It's simply because, these are some of the country's largest and most influential companies. So what happens at this level, we believe it just matters profoundly and more beyond than the individual companies, as they help set the norms and the wider practices in our corporate sector. So with that longitudinal data and those insights, Stephen, we know in South Africa that women have generally closed the skills gap, the education gap. So even if you account for those things, we cannot get to a conclusion as into why women remain underrepresented, particularly in executive roles, even though we've seen marginal improvement in board representation. But even there, we still lack parity. And one of the reasons maybe we usually attribute them to the inherent and the innate structures of these management or leadership or positions of power, because people like echo chambers, because of they are male dominated, I think men are more comfortable with working with other men. But also it can be issues of boys' clubs and some chronism and some close networks, Stephen, because even if you are looking across the board structures, you see one board may closely resemble the other, so people who've worked together before are more likely to work together again.
Are there other things that happen maybe at a certain stage in the career? Maybe the children, maybe there's something else, and that sort of slows women down compared to men, or they're not promoted as quickly as men, and by the time the CEO job comes up, then they've missed out. There's a sort of that structural reason as well, perhaps?
Look, we cannot shy away from the reality that usually women bear the domestic responsibility more than men, and a lot of households in SA are female-headed households. There are various studies that we've analyzed over time when we are wanting to see what are the underlying reasons, and we see from the SA Tide research that during the child-rearing years, women tend to maybe step out of the job market, or at least would opt to focus more on children and running the households. But that in and of itself, Stephen, it shouldn't be an explainer, because that domestic burden, we cannot run any economy without having people who are doing the domestic work. But the question is, how do we enable women who are usually seized with this domestic burden to be equally active at work, or how are we creating conditions for women to thrive, given the fact that they bear this disproportionate domestic responsibility that we cannot really have society without. Also, Stephen, to take it to the workplace in general, you will find various theories, the issues of psychological safety, the issue of negotiation, whether women are putting themselves out there. Like, for instance, some of the studies that you'll see, men are likely to apply for certain positions even if they do not qualify, whereas women, on the other hand, they would want to tick all the boxes before they can actually apply, So these are some of the issues, but remember, these are just blanketed statements. The issue here is, Stephen, is that what we do not see are deliberate leadership pipelines that are created specifically to address the issue of gender parity in the workplaces, but it's not for its own sake. What we argue at Joshua is that we will not reap the benefits of our collective human capital in this country if capable, skilled people are excluded in these positions of power based on their gender. So at least companies ought to be making deliberate efforts, setting up those talent pipelines that are equally targeted to capable, skilled, and qualified women, because we have plenty of those. But unfortunately, Stephen, they quickly reach what we call the glass ceiling. But more concerning, women, what we found on trends when we are looking at the data closely, they are largely concentrated in the lower occupations. Now, there is this term that we call a sticky floor effect. It simply means when you enter our job markets or the labor market, if you enter at a more junior level as a woman, that sticky floor effect simply captures you. For you to climb from junior to middle management, senior management, it is less likely to happen at the pace that it will happen maybe for us, men. So these are some of the trends that we see.
Do you think, Kwanele, do you see any momentum building up to change this? Or is it going to require some kind of structural intervention? And, it's one thing for a government or for a JSE to say 40% or 50% of your board must be women. But to say your CEO, which is usually one person, must be a woman, I think that's probably a tougher thing to say. Is there a structural change that we need, or do you see momentum, and do you see this changing over time anyway?
We are optimistic, Stephen. We cannot just throw our toys that change will be there, because in our analysis, we do demonstrate that there are companies that do have women representation in their top senior to top management. But also, as you would know, that there are recent legislative developments relating to the sectoral targets, where companies now have to comply with the Employment Equity 5-year sectoral target effective 1 September 2025. However, we are saying that you can prescribe these targets, Stephen, but if there is no deliberate focus internally to say how do we nurture talent across the board, it will just not happen. If we are not creating spaces to ensure that in leadership development, talent pipeline, skills development, we shy away or we move away from the permanent generalization of women, nothing will actually move. If anything, we'll just continue just ticking the boxes. Even those sectoral targets are not really helping, because there is a downside to them. Whilst we need them to be there in the employment equity legislative framework, companies can simply tick the box to say, we comply with 30% representation at senior management level, so we are good. If anything, what we are doing as just is try to say as a matter of good corporate governance practices, how do you look at those targets as not a target, an optimal target, but just as a bare minimum? And concerningly, Stephen, even the companies that had like ambitious targets to ensure that women occupy fairly senior positions in the workforce, we see them receding, like subsiding to comply with these bare minimum targets. Whilst we do need the legislative frameworks, but there are risks associated with those. But again, just to answer your question, we just hope and we do foresee that maybe the idea of transformation doesn't become like a legislative question, but rather a question of good corporate governance. There might be a change, and it's slow.
Kwanele, thank you. Kwanele Ngogela is the head of social impact at Just Share You at the Money Show, 5 minutes to 7. Well, it's also emerged that around 57% of women in our country say they feel mostly or completely empowered to make important decisions about their future, but nearly 40% say they're still not earning enough money to be financially secure. Haley Parry is a money coach and facilitator of One Life Insurance's Truth About Money. Haley, good evening. Good to chat again. I don't know if someone's done a similar survey with men, but do you see a big difference between how women feel about their money and their financial future and how men do?
Stephen, I think there are a couple of similarities. You know, for example, we see that around financial pressures, the cost of living, putting pressure on people's, monthly cash flow as well as high debt. But there are specific things where we are seeing a difference and where women are feeling a particular kind of pain when it comes to their personal finances. And, it actually follows on from your previous guess, because nearly 40%, of women in our survey are saying that insufficient income is one of the biggest obstacles preventing them from becoming financially secure.
And I mean, that's also about the pay gap, right? Men are generally paid more than women across their lifetimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've got the pay gap, we've got the caregiving penalty, and all of these come into play. I mean, it's the first time I've heard the phrase of the sticky floor, but I think that, those are the kind of things that contribute. But then when it comes to, what does that mean when it comes to managing our personal finances? I think there then are some unique stresses on women. One of the things that we picked up is that, more than a quarter of the respondents are single parents or primary caregivers, and that will obviously accentuate the kind of financial stress and pressure that women find themselves under. But at the same time, we also saw some really positive things coming out of the survey. I was very pleased to see that when asked who had the greatest influence on, the people that they've become today, just under 60% cited their mothers. And I think that speaks to the role that family relationships and critically female role models have across generations. And in particular, we need to be mindful of what that means from a money management point of view. How can we do things differently so that our daughters are looking at their finances through a different lens than their moms or grandmothers?
Do you believe that we're making progress as a society in this? I mean, on some levels, we must, just because of how much this society has changed in the last 50 years and particularly the last 30, but obviously still so much more to do.
I do think we're seeing a change, Stephen. The increasing financial confidence is a good sign. And I think there's this critical resilience piece that's coming into play where women are now more proactively looking at how can I improve my financial resilience? What does that mean? So how do I take care of the things that I have seen negatively impacting the woman in my life? So things like getting in place an emergency fund, getting yourself a financial education so you can do things differently, learning how to open a tax-free savings account. How do you manage things like putting in place funeral cover or life cover, having insurance that covers things like disability and rare disease. Those are the kind of things that help make sure that the disasters that you may have seen in circles that you've moved in, if you know that you're taking care of that downside risk, then that frees you up to look at, okay, now that that's taken care of, what can I do differently to start improving not only my cash flow situation, but also the ability to build wealth and invest and save money for the future.
Haley Perry, thank you. Money coach and facilitator at One Life Insurance's Truth About Money.
And now, The Money Show.
With Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking, turning intent into execution. That's how ABSA are invested in Africa's energy future. 7 minutes after 7. Plenty coming up in the next little while. We'll talk about land. It's such a complicated, difficult and important issue. But new research talking about how people, it seems, tell researchers they don't want title deeds. I was staggered by this. I found it really interesting, but maybe that's just a reflection of my sort of suburban identity. Dr. Sipe Zansi is an agricultural economist at the Agricultural Research Council who did a lot of that research. So really looking forward to that conversation. We'll talk to Bronwyn Williams in a book feature. We're looking at the book Making a Life, Young Men on Johannesburg's Urban Margins. And this is particularly around young people who are in Zandspruit, a large area. It's mostly informal settlement, about how people try and basically make ends meet, how difficult it is in the lives that they try and lead and how they sort of get by. And you can imagine how difficult that must be. And then how I make my money tonight. Garth de Klerk is the CEO at the Insurance Crime Bureau. I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation. Insurance crime is such a big issue, and we've seen more and more of it. I mean, we've seen so many cases recently of people being killed for insurance. I mean, those I'm hoping are quite rare, but it is amazing to me how often they happen. I was thinking a bit about it, actually. There was a time when insurance fraud would be, if you had to prove a claim, you could say, well, my car got stolen, and you go to the police report, or my house burnt down. That happened to me once. The house I was living in, you send pictures of the house, right? But what if someone or a business says we've been hacked and we lost money as a result? How do you prove that? How do you disprove it? That must make it a lot more complicated. I'm looking forward to that conversation. Good to hear from you, 011-883-0702 and 021-446-0567. And voice notes, of course, on 072-702-1702.
The Money Show.
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DSTV channel 856.
Well, you know how important historical debates around land, the possession of land are in our country, mainly because of reasons of our history, how land by and large was taken from black people by white people, but also because of the way so much land in South Africa is currently administered communally. Think of the Ingonyama Trust, for example. Within this is the claim, and it often comes from people, I suppose, who, live in suburbs, that if all this land was granted to occupiers in the form of tenure, if people could use that land to take up loans or start a business or pass it on to their children, the land would have more value. That's the sort of argument. But a new survey in 7 former homeland areas has found 70% of people say they don't want title or title deeds for the land they're living on. Dr. Sipe Zansi is one of the people who conducted the research, an agricultural economist at the Agricultural Research Council. Dr. Zansi, good evening and thank you for your time. I have to say the result of this was, I think, a surprise for many people in the suburbs. I think there's an idea there that you want to own your own house and then it's mine and it's my children's land. Why is the situation in these areas so different to that?
Good evening, Stephen. Thanks for having me. I was also shocked, as you are, about the results of this survey that we did of about 245 rural households. But mostly the reasons are centered around government control. So many believe that once they have title deeds, the government or the municipalities will start imposing some money or levies for services such as rubbish collection and so forth. So I think for most of them, that was the main concern of having title deeds. But it's not all the 7 former homeland. There was one former homeland which its residents or households had a different view. It's around Zebediela. It falls under the former Libua. So in that area, most households said they wanted title deeds because they believe they will strengthen their land rights. And it's because there had been incidents where some households were removed from their land because there was going to be a development or something like that. And they didn't like it.
So, I mean, this is a real reflection on the sort of broken relationship with the state, right? People don't trust the state. They see the state as maybe taking something from them, and so they don't want to change how they occupy land.
I'm not entirely sure about that, but what we're observing, I think you would also agree with me if you have been driving around rural areas, especially next to the main roads. You'll see beautiful houses there, which are similar to those you see in urban areas. And when you dig deeper in that, you'll see that some people are selling their houses in urban areas and starting to build houses in these, what we could call rural suburbs. The reason is being land is relatively cheaper there, and there aren't very much more controls from the municipalities and so forth. And also the sense of belonging. So if you have been following or reading about how people who were born in these former homelands, even when they move to urban areas, they still make contacts or go back home to rural areas. And I'm one of those people.
I would imagine the other thing is that, so as a suburban person, I kind of feel if I don't own my house, my children might not get it, right? Or the value that I think is within it. But people living in these areas must be very confident that their families will be able to still live there.
Yes, I think the majority is. And for a fact is that some questions that we asked in this survey was around whether people are selling land to each other in these rural areas. And apparently it's happening. And people don't have concerns that if I buy land from someone else, it will be taken away. Surely. So I think there is some trust in this informal ruling or ownership of land. That's what I would believe. And I think because of the customary land act or law, I think there is some belief and assurance that at least if it's been happening for many years, it will not change now.
So,
yes. So if okay.
Well, sorry, Dr. Zansi, I interrupted you, but let me just press ahead because I don't want to lose the thought. So I accept that people must feel that they can buy land so someone can buy land from Stephen informally and feel that they will be allowed to occupy it. It'll be their land and Stephen won't come and try and force them off their land, right? If there was a system of tenure, though, would that land have more value? I think that might be quite a complicated economic question.
I'm not entirely sure, but I think they would, because I know for a fact in some rural areas that I know, which are next to where I'm from, where the developers, some white farmers who saw Arab land lying fallow and wanted to rent that land from the rural households who own it. As development of planting or preparing the land started, and after a while, it stopped. And when I asked, they said some of the rural household had concerns or were raising unreasonable demands. And apparently the white farmer pulled out. And I would imagine also a situation where the bank that maybe the white farmer would want to get loan from said, the business that you are starting has high risk. What if these households say, we no longer want this arrangement? What will happen to this whole investment? So I think, it will, if you think about it economically, I think it should. But it would be more complicated than we think it could just jump off the prices then. And maybe if I can indicate the prices of land there, they differ according to the areas, but for maybe half a hectare, quarter hectare of land for residential purposes, it ranges on about 1,500 rand to about 5,000 in Zebediela, where it seems to be, 2,000 rand, where it seems to be expensive. But for people who want land for businesses, I think the prices are a bit high, ranging from 5,000 to about 30,000 in some parts of KZN.
Do the traditional leaders play a role in this? I mean, the Ngonyama Trust got wrapped over the knuckles for the way it was managed. But when people are buying and selling land like this, are the traditional leaders administering that? Does it sort of go through them in any way?
Yes, but it's an interesting dynamic. We also interviewed traditional leaders in these areas. And while the residents said, most of them said they don't want title deeds or formal title deeds, but the traditional leaders felt otherwise. They said, though in relation to those in Zebediela, where they said they want title deeds, but traditional leaders are also of the view that title deeds should rather be given to them rather than individual households. Yes, so when someone wants land, they go through the traditional council, and there are set rules in each community, which has to do with paying some dues, that has to do with some brandies, beers, and soft drinks, and a bit of a money, where they will make some form of introduction of this new land owner to the community. But the interesting dynamic is that all of the traditional leaders, they said land in communal areas should not be sold, and they are not selling the land. But when we did the individual interviews, we learned that land is indeed being sold. And I believe the traditional leaders themselves even know that, and some they have sold land to other people. And in one traditional leader that we visited, which I will not really tell where it was, I saw that they had expectation that we will leave something to them. So I think there is some kind of expectation that people, when they want to do something or want to get land, of course, they need to pay. And I want to believe that, yes, maybe besides the money that is paid to the whole community, which of course go through the traditional leader, there could be some money that is going through to maybe traditional leaders or traditional council.
Thank you so much. It's a fascinating research. I find this so interesting. So much more to talk about. Dr. Sipho Zansi is an agricultural economist at the Agricultural Research Council. Dr. Zansi, thanks so much. 21 minutes after 7.
The Money Show.
Business books.
Well, the book we're looking at this week, it's called Making a Life, Young Men on Johannesburg's Urban Margins. It's by Hannah J. Dawson. It's about particularly young people in Zandspruit. And Bronwyn Williams, the trend translator and future finance specialist at Flux Trends, has been looking at it. Bronwyn, now, good evening. So 2/3 of young people in Zandspruit don't have jobs. And I'm presuming this book is about trying to speak to them, trying to understand them. What did you learn about life in Zandspruit?
Yes, this is a book written by an academic. It's also on the shortlist for the Sunday Times Book Awards, which is why I'm reading it. But I thought it was really interesting, especially given the context of just coming out of Women's Day, but also with the elections coming up. This is obviously a young white researcher who spent a lot of time talking, and a female researcher at that, a lot of time talking to Black men living in extreme poverty. So she's someone that's a complete outsider. She's in many ways a complete opposite to the people that she's researching, which I think also makes for an interesting dynamic in our South African context. But the point is that she tried to come at this from with fresh eyes, with naive eyes, yes, you could say that, but to see what was really happening when it comes to the economics, but also the socio-economics of young men trying to, as the cover says, make a life in very, very dire conditions. And what's interesting, for me, perhaps most interesting, is actually something she comes to at the conclusion of the book. She contrasts even millennials look at the diagnosis of what the problem is, townships and places like Zandspruit being a place of lack, with what they really are, what she's uncovered through the years of going back and forward to these sorts of places. She has found that, in fact, these places are what happens when society doesn't have place in the formal economy. What happens is these shadow economies pop up. And shadow economy is really the right word here, because she talks about people being able to not just eke out, but actually make a better living in the grey economy, and really is the grey economy. Borderline criminality, lots of extortion going on, lots of patronage, lots of nepotism, lots of grey areas taking place. But nonetheless, this grey economy, outside the oversight of the taxman, of the legal infrastructure, of the protections of the law, is able to offer these residents greater protections and greater, if not exactly prosperity, but certainly greater prospects than our formal economy and in the so-called light. And that, of course, makes for a very interesting diagnosis of what's happening in our society, how we are inadvertently, or maybe even vertently, encouraging illicit activity, encouraging the grey economy. And we can layer that onto, of course, Capitec studies, I think we've spoken about it on the show too, that shows how even the unemployed are still making a living. But what does that living really look like, and what is the greater cost to society? Again, I always think it's interesting to compare and contrast South Africa with what's happened in South America, and how informality and the illicit grey economy is growing at a faster pace, eating into the formal economy to a certain point where you actually don't have control to bring that back under control. And I think it really speaks to, the challenges that we have to address, and the sort of fork in the road that we have as South African society. Do we encourage the periphery, as again, to use a South American term for this, or do we reinvest in making the center, making the legal path actually attractive to young people? And that's just the core issue here.
So, what are people doing? Okay, so, extortion, is that violence or the threat of violence? Are there other things that they're doing?
Oh, it's more like patronage. So you can look at what happens in Italy. Like if you want to open a car wash business, you have to know the right people, you have to pay the right people, you have to pay the right bystanders, or your business is just simply not going to succeed. It's those sorts of little acts that reinforce informal power structures. And also, and this is the other issue that I wanted to address with this book, that in places where the formal economy and where sort of actual rands and cents don't buy you status and privilege, your social economy can often have just as much currency when it comes to who succeeds and who doesn't. So that, of course, is it's borderline illegality, but you could also say it's more informal power structures, right? But it's power structures that would be frowned upon or outright banned in the formal economy, where, of course, discrimination in terms of your hiring and in terms of the flourishes is regulated. So this is a messy gray area, because this very informality and borderline illegality is what is giving people a means to survival. And that, of course, is core to this work. And many of the men that she speaks to have set up these businesses with greater or lesser degrees of sunlight and disinfectant on them. Not to say everyone she speaks to is engaged in the illicit economy, but certainly the grey informal economy is able to give them a much greater both social status and money in the bank at the end of the month, both layers.
And Bronwyn, very quickly, if you can, as someone who looks at our economy very closely, did this contain any clues of trying to improve things for our economy? I mean, was there anything there that you thought, we could build on that, or this is happening, or something like that?
Oh, absolutely. She spends quite a lot of time talking to property rights, or lack thereof, and how this perpetuates many of the problems, but can also be viewed as a solution. So it is something that we're going to have to come back to. The land issue is not going away. I know our sort of expropriation court cases drag on at the constitutional level, but the same things are taking place at a much more fractal level, even outside the eyes of the law. So these are things we have to address. It's all about ownership, who gets rights, who gets status, and does hereditary blood ancestry have a direct effect? I mean, it clearly does, but should it have in our future?
Bronwyn Williams, thanks so much. Trend translator and future finance specialist at Flux Trends. 28 minutes now after 7.
The Money Show. How I make my money.
25 minutes now to 8 the time. Well, I don't know if you know this, but insurance fraud has a big impact on you, no matter really where you are in our society. And we thought to try and find out how you stop insurance fraud could be quite an interesting conversation. Garth de Klerk is the CEO of the Insurance Crime Bureau and has agreed to spend some time with you on The Money Show tonight. Garth, good evening, and thanks so much for coming on this evening, particularly on a public holiday.
Yeah, good evening, Stephen. It's my absolute pleasure, especially on such an important public holiday where we're celebrating our women of South Africa.
So with insurance fraud, I think there's a perception that, they're a big company, they can pay, it doesn't matter, so what? It's not like that, is it? What kind of impact does insurance crime have on ordinary people?
It's exactly it, Stephen. I think a lot of people see insurance fraud as being victimless, and it's not the case. Insurance fraud, there's always a victim of some type, whether it's a corporate victim or an individual victim. Because remember, on insurance fraud, you are often looking at a physical crime being involved as well. Now, that could be anything from kidnapping, murder, hijackings, staged vehicle accidents, etc., etc. So insurance fraud is not victimless, and there's always a cost. Even if that cost is only monetary to the insurance industry, that cost is then passed over to the insurance companies. So definitely a very real cost that we have to take into account.
What kind of fraud do you see? I mean, what are the biggest categories of insurance fraud? I mean, I have in my head the sort of classic movie of someone burning down a building, and I have the other thing where we've seen a couple of cases recently of people actually being killed for their life insurance and someone taking out the policy just to do that. I mean, a terrible thing. Sometimes it's family members. What kind of categories do you see?
So on the short-term side, on the non-life side, most of the fraud revolves around vehicle crime. So whether that is stage hijacking, stage incidents, vehicle theft, vehicle cloning, a lot of the portfolio revolves around vehicle crime because there's a lot of high-value vehicles involved in that. It's easy to steal, to hijack, to clone, and to move those vehicles. On the life side, as you mentioned, Stephen, we see a lot of fraud in terms of insured interests in people's lives. So I can insure my mom-in-law, my cousin, my auntie, and then bump them off for the benefits of an insurance policy. So unfortunately, we're seeing a rise in those type of murders. We're seeing a higher level of detection because of the work that the industry is doing together to uncover these people. So people like Rosemary, the Shikani sisters, those are all investigations where the industries come together with law enforcement to put an end to those type of individuals.
Okay, so when you think that there's been a case, I mean, what rings an alarm bell? How does it end up coming across the desk of someone in your organization?
It could be a number of entry points. So firstly, we run the fraud line for the insurance industry. So we receive a lot of anonymous tip-off, a lot of whistleblower type of reports, as well as we sweat the industry on behalf of the insurance companies. So all of the major insurance companies on both the non-life as well as the life industry report their claims to us, give us other information, report suspicious claims, suspicious individuals, etc. We take all of the information, we look for commonalities, we run algorithms, AI on top of it, and we look for the syndicates committing the fraud. So there's a number of entry points where we getting data in or intelligence in. We then investigate it, work with law enforcement, and look to convict the people involved in those syndicates.
So I would imagine then that the way that they give themselves away is they try the same type of thing over and over again within a relatively short space of time?
There's that case. Take a look at Rosemary again, Shakani Sisters, some of the bigger car theft syndicates that we investigate. Yes, there are repeat cases, but we also catch the individual guy that's murdered his loved one once, So we pick up the repeat cases, but we also detect the individual cases where somebody's taken out a policy with nefarious intentions.
Okay, so how do you investigate that? So someone dies, you get a phone call saying Stephen did it, and he did it deliberately. Where do you go from there? I mean, you basically now have to be almost like a police officer. You're sort of, insurance fraud investigation.
That's exactly what we are, Stephen. Yeah, that's exactly what we are. In fact, a large percentage of our investigator base are ex-law enforcement. We work very closely with existing law enforcement. We work with the Financial Intelligence Center, the FFCA. We work with the Secret Service of the United States, the Homeland Affairs, with SASA, Department of Home Affairs, in order to put together that picture, Stephen. So you've had a case, you've murdered somebody. There's nothing wrong with having life insurance or a funeral policy on an individual's life. But where there are suspicious circumstances around the death, that's where the crime comes in, and that's where we start investigating. And we look for, I'm not going to go into it, but certain elements within that death, certain elements within signing of the death certificate, handling of the body, the burials, etc., etc. So we know what we're looking for when we enter that type of investigation.
Okay, so you investigate, and then at what point, I mean, what happens? Do you file a report? Do you send it to the insurance company? Because someone would have to, I presume, to deny the claim, you would need some form of evidence. So you'd need to put that up in a kind of legally manageable form.
Good. So, Stephen, what we do is we will actually open the SAPS case or case on behalf of the insurance industry, whether it's a single insurer or multiple insurers. We will handle the registering of the case. We will handle working with law enforcement to investigate the case. We will work with law enforcement to prosecute the case with the MPA, etc., to ensure that there's a conviction. So the role of the Insurance Crime Bureau is to be a nodal point between the insurance industry and some financial services sector, and then law enforcement and the prosecuting authorities, to ensure the case is not only detected, but properly handled all the way to conviction. And it's really partnering with law enforcement and the MPA to ensure that these bad actors are taken out of circulation.
So, I mean, is it investigating, like you see on TV? Is it speaking to the neighbors, speaking to people who knew, looking for physical evidence, that kind of thing?
100%. Hiding under bushes with binoculars, digging up bodies, chasing cars down in the middle of the night, driving around looking for vehicles. It's a physical environment, Stephen. As one of my colleagues says, you can detect crime using a computer, but you're not going to find that criminal hiding under your seat at the office. Our team are out on the road, working with law enforcement, working with other industry bodies to ensure that we take the fight to the criminal where they exist.
I would imagine that there'll be a couple of things that would send up a red flag, and one would be the length of the policy. If someone's had a policy for 20 years or been with the insurance company for 20 years and their car gets stolen for the first time or the first time in 10 years or whatever, that's a claim that maybe if I were the insurance company, I wouldn't be that suspicious about. But if someone's had been insured with me for a month and now has a car stolen, well, that I'm going to look into a little bit more closely.
Yes, correct. And, if there's a suspicion on either of those claims, we have the ability to have a look at that individual's claims history. So the person might have had the car for 10, 15 years, never claimed on the vehicle, but they've claimed on their laptop, they've claimed on a cell phone, they've claimed on 3 geyser bursts and spoiled food. So they have a history of claiming. Now, that's not necessarily nefarious either, because insurers are there to settle valid claims, and sometimes people just have bad luck. But we are able to then take it a step further and say, well, what else are they doing? Are they only claiming from one insurer? Because often you will see that individuals claim the same loss from multiple insurers, and that's unjustified enrichment, so it's illegal. So we take a look if there's an element of fraud, if there's an element of suspicion. We start to examine the broader picture rather than just have a look at one incident. So you're quite right, the age of the policy is the flag, but it's certainly not the only flag that we look at. We look at previous behavior, financial positioning, etc. of that individual.
So the nature of this must be changing, right? Some things are physically quite easy to prove. I made the point earlier. I actually lived in a house. I was renting in a property, and it burnt down. And I could say to my insurance company, this was, 20 years ago, more. And I could say to my insurance company, this is the house that burnt down. Here's a newspaper article about it. I'd, previously said this is where I was living. So that, all of those things. And the insurance company was fine. Okay. So that's easy. But what, for example, if I said I had Bitcoin on my computer and it was hacked and stolen, or if I'm a company and my computer network was hacked and we lost business as a result? I mean, those things become much harder to prove.
Yes, and I mean, you're touching on a fascinating area of investigation. When we get into the cyber environment, the ballpark changes, the rules of engagement changes. You're talking about a different level or quality of criminal, probably a little bit more sophisticated. The elements are different to the physical crimes like car theft or murder, etc. You're talking about a higher level of investigation. And that's one area that we are starting to see a dramatic increase in South Africa specifically, where the cybercrime incidences are increasing. Now, that's not only as you discussed, my Bitcoin was hacked or my network was breached, but you're also seeing things like sextortion and romance scams and the typical 419 phishing scams, etc. So all of those type of scams where an individual is put in a position where they're in a loss, whether they've lost money or in some cases, very tragically, they even commit suicide. We have to be able to investigate those, work with law enforcement, and still track down the perpetrators. Now, those perps could be anywhere in the world, or they could be sitting in Soweto, as we've seen this last week with that Swedish teen that committed suicide. So cybercrime, a lot more sophisticated, on the rise, and it's something that we as a industry, as a society, are having to adapt to and start to reskill ourselves.
There's so much to it. We're speaking to Garth de Klerk, the CEO of the Insurance Crime Bureau. Everything you ever needed to know about working in the insurance crime fraud business. In other words, stopping insurance fraud, but working out how to do it, how to investigate it, and how you get into this kind of field. It's 12 minutes now to 8 here with The Money Show.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, turning intent into execution. That's how Absa are invested in Africa's energy future.
Money Show. How I make my money.
10 minutes to 8 the time. The business of dealing with insurance fraud. Garth de Klerk is the CEO of the Insurance Crime Bureau. Garth, you mentioned that most people who come into this field come from law enforcement. So are most people detectives previously?
There's a lot of people that we deal with, and certainly the individuals within the Insurance Crime Bureau come from that detective layer, the detective layer of the SAPS. If we have a look at who we work with in the industry, a lot of those people have come through other programs. You know, they've got BComs or BAs specializing in criminology. They've got industry level qualifications like the Institute of Certified Fraud Practitioners, the ICFP, or the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, so the ACFE. So there's a variety of skills that are brought together. It's not only law enforcement skills. We also have individuals that have got degrees and qualifications in how to investigate, how to put together a case, how to look at things from a forensics point of view. That's suspicious minds, Stephen.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, the previous experience must be so important because I wouldn't know where to start. I mean, I suppose if someone said to me, go and investigate this case, I'd start by, speaking to all the people around it and probably tipping them off. You mentioned that, that you can't find someone, a computer can tell you a crime's been committed, but the person won't be hiding under the desk, and that's true. But I was reminded that actually social media will often tell you what people were doing and if they've suddenly come into a lot of money.
That is so true. And, without wanting to tell people not to do it, but social media gives us a lot of information, and there's a whole new field of study around social media and taking a look at how pictures are interpreted and when a photograph was taken and where it was taken, what the geolocation and geotab is and what the shadows are. And so there's a whole new field of study coming in now around social media and how to investigate incidences around social media. You're quite right. And we've in fact seen this at some of the commissions recently. Bad actors talk too much on social media. It's lovely. We really appreciate it. We enjoy it, and long may it continue.
No, sure. A question about your revenue. Okay. So if someone is, found, so Stephen has been, conducting insurance fraud on cars, and I was insured with ABC, and now you're able to prove that and you bust me at it. Who pays you for that? I mean, and at what point do they pay you? Is it ABC Insurance who pays you?
Sure. So we're a non-profit organization, Stephen. We're not in combating fraud and crime to make money out of it. We have been established initially by the non-life industry within South Africa. We have grown our exposure and influence into the life industry. So we are a membership-driven organization. We've got 35 insurance licenses that we represent. They pay us a flat fee upfront at the beginning of the year, obviously dependent on their size. So insurer A might pay more than insurer D because of their size of the pie. And they pay us upfront and we get on and do our jobs. Whether we do one investigation or 100 investigations, that fee remains the same. So we don't get a finder's fee if we recover a Bentley and a different fee if we recover a Polo. That's not the way it works. We have a certain amount of revenue every year. We agree that with our board that represent the members. We set our strategies, we set our goals, and we go out there and we chase these bad actors that are committing fraud and crime.
And I mean, I presume the more crime there is, the more important you become and the more the insurance companies feel they need to contribute. I mean, dealing with insurance fraud must become a big part of their model.
100%, Stephen. And again, it's not all about the Insurance Crime Bureau. So you're right. The more fraud and the more crime that we see in South Africa, the more important community is. We work with hundreds of stakeholders, whether they are private stakeholders or business stakeholders like the RTMC, again, SASSA, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Home Affairs, et cetera, et cetera. The importance is that we have an active, committed community that has got the common goal of combating fraud and crime. So the Insurance Crime Bureau is one player within that community. We work with other non-profit organizations within the community as well to bring together different data to create actionable intelligence. So we work with the banking sector, we work with BLSA, we work with B4SA, we work with BASA, all those nice acronyms in order to bring together intelligence to have an impact on the crime that we're facing in South Africa. And you and I know that crime in South Africa is just out of control.
Sure. Are there any cases, Garth, that you're allowed to talk about that stand out, that your team has been involved in? I mean, I remember the Rosemary and Lawville case, and there's still more to come from that, and it's astonishing how many people she was involved in murdering, and that she was a former police officer, and. Other cases that stand out? I mean, are there some cases where you think, I know this was a crime, but I can't prove it? I mean, we weren't able to get the money back, things like that?
Yeah, Stephen, definitely we do see cases like that. I mean, there's a lot of memorable cases that we've got on our table at the moment, but they're ongoing in court, so I can't really talk about them too much. But Rosemary was a big one. The Shikani systems are a big one. There's a very big gentleman that's currently going through the court system at the moment that was involved in a lot of vehicle crimes and other crimes. Because remembering, we don't, especially these criminals, they don't all put their money in the couch. Yeah. They use the funds that they get from these illicit activities to fund other illicit activities, whether it's drug smuggling, human trafficking, money laundering, whatever it might be. So there's a few big cases going on at the moment where, again, as a community, we're able to come together and take these guys out.
When you look at this business, what's the big attraction? I would imagine for some people it's just justice. For others, it's the thrill of the chase must be quite something. It must be quite exciting in some ways.
I think that's exactly it, Stephen. It's the ability to get up on a daily basis and say, today I made a difference. I came from a credit insurance background initially. My degree and qualification was initially corporate governance. I'm a fellow of the Corporate Governance Association of South Africa. I then started to channel my expertise into forensics and fraud. I knew nothing about it when I started. I was like you, I would watch a guy, I would let half the suspects go. But the people that we work with are passionate about improving South Africa. And that's something that we need to see more of, not only in our business communities, but at higher levels, in our politicians, in our law enforcement, in our prosecutorial authorities, etc. And that's what we're about, is just introducing the conversation, say, listen, guys, we can do better.
Garth, thank you. I found it fascinating, so interesting over the last half hour. Garth de Klerk is the CEO of the Insurance Crime Bureau, and everything you ever needed to know about dealing with insurance fraud does show you, and I think, it's hard to disagree, isn't it? I think everyone will agree how bad crime is at the moment. It does seem to be, I know that some of the murder rates are coming down and all the rest, but really is a very difficult time. And if you work in insurance, it'll be having a big impact on you. Garth de Klerk, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking, turning intent into execution. That's how ABSA are invested in Africa's energy future.
Well, looking at the US, things turning a little negative. Bear in mind that there were record highs on Friday and oil prices are creeping up. The Dow Jones is down 0.27%. The Nasdaq is down 0.32%. The S&P 500 is down 0.04% at the moment. And I think generally people just a little nervous about the outlook, a little nervous about the prospects for peace between the US and Iran still negotiating with Oman about the Strait of Hormuz and all of that. So I think that's still weighing on things. We, of course, will be back with you tomorrow. Don't forget Personal Finance with Warren Ingram tomorrow. Really looking forward to that conversation. He's always got so much to say. Thanks for being with us. It's 8 o'clock.